"I haven't touched a woman in years," the Duke confessed, then kissed his maid. The words echo in a silent study, firelight flickering, storm winds rattling the glass. A nobleman, cold and untouchable since his wife's death, leans close to the one woman forbidden to him his maid. One stolen kiss sets the entire household ablaze with whispers of scandal. The servants stir, the church bell tolls, and an ambitious lady sharpens her claws to destroy the maid's honor. But hidden in the shadows lie letters from the Duke's. Late wife letters that could shatter every expectation and turn disgrace into destiny. Will this forbidden love be buried beneath duty and shame, or will the truth rise higher than the crown itself? Drop a comment below and share which part of the world you're tuning in from today. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more The Autumn Wind Whipped Through. Clara's worn cloak as the hired carriage rattled along the muddy country lanes. Her fingers traced the careful stitching her father had lovingly sewn into the fabric years ago. Each bump and jostle reminded her that she was leaving behind everything she had ever known, her small village, her widowed father's forge, and the simple life she had lived for all of her 20 years. The late afternoon sun broke through heavy clouds just as Montfort Hall came into view. Clara's breath caught in her throat. The great house rose from the misty grounds like something from a dream, its weathered stone walls stretching toward the sky. Countless windows glinted in the fading light, and elaborate chimneys stood like sentinels against the gathering dusk. "'Tis grander than I imagined," she whispered to herself, clutching her father's cloak closer. The weight of responsibility settled heavily on her shoulders. This position would mean a better life for them, both if she could prove herself worthy of it. The carriage wheels crunched on gravel as they approached the servants' entrance. Clara gathered her single carpet bag, containing all her worldly possessions, and descended carefully onto the damp ground. Before she could reach for the heavy door knocker, it swung open to reveal a woman in a stark black dress, her gray hair neat beneath a white cap. "You'll be Miss Whitcomb, then." The woman's stern expression softened slightly as she took in Clara's travel-worn appearance. "I am Mrs. Enderby, the housekeeper. Come in before you catch your death in this chill." Clara followed Mrs. Enderby through a maze of narrow corridors, trying to memorize each turn. The stone walls held the warmth from nearby kitchen fires, and the scents of beeswax and fresh bread mingled in the air. Servants hurried past with barely a glance, their footsteps quick and purposeful. "You'll serve as personal maid to His Grace," the Duke, Mrs. Enderby explained, leading Clara up a narrow staircase. "The position requires discretion, attention to detail, and absolute loyalty. His Grace values his privacy above all else." "Yes, Mrs. Enderby, I understand." Clara's heart fluttered at the magnitude of her new duties. To serve a duke directly was more than she had dared hope for. The housekeeper showed Clara to the servants' hall, where a simple supper awaited. "Eat, then rest. Your duties begin at dawn." As Clara spooned up warm soup in the scullery, whispered conversations drifted around her. Two young maids at the far end of the table bent their heads. Together, their words carrying in the stone-walled space. 8 years since her Grace passed, and he's not so much as looked at another woman, one maid murmured. "Like living in a tomb, this place is." "Aye, and colder than one, too," the other replied. "His Grace barely speaks to anyone, just haunts those halls like a ghost himself. You mark my words, grief's frozen, his heart solid." Clara's spoon paused halfway to her lips. 8 years of mourning seemed an eternity of sorrow. She thought of her own father's grief when her mother died, how the light had slowly returned to his eyes as the years passed. What manner of love could leave such an endless winter in its wake? Mrs. Enderby's sharp voice cut through the gossip. "Less chatter, more work. These floors won't scrub themselves." The maids scattered, leaving Clara alone with her thoughts. Later, in her tiny attic room, Clara lit a single candle and unpacked her few belongings. The flame cast dancing shadows on the slanted walls as she smoothed her spare dress and carefully folded her father's cloak. From somewhere in the vast house below, footsteps echoed through the corridor steady. Measured steps that spoke of sleepless nights and lonely vigils. Clara sat on the narrow bed, listening to the unfamiliar creaks and sighs of the great house settling around her. Tomorrow, she would begin her service to the Duke, this mysterious man whose grief had become legend among his servants. Despite the whispers and warnings, she felt a curious determination rising within her. "I will serve faithfully," she whispered, to the flickering candlelight. "Whatever shadows haunt these halls, I will do my duty with honor." The candle flame bobbed as if in agreement, and Clara prepared herself for sleep. Knowing dawn would come all too soon, thunder crashed against the windows of Montfort Hall as Clara hurried through the dimly lit corridors. A stack of letters clutched to her chest. The evening shadows stretched long across the polished floors, broken only by occasional flashes of lightning that illuminated the stern portraits of Montfort's ancestors lining the walls. Mrs. Enderby had thrust the correspondence into her hands moments after the servants' supper. These must go to His Grace's study immediately, the housekeeper had instructed, her tone brooking no delay despite the late hour. Clara's heart fluttered as she approached the heavy oak door of the Duke's study. In her 3 days at Montfort Hall, she had glimpsed him only from afar, a tall, imposing figure who moved through the house like a ghost, speaking little and smiling never. She knocked softly, then louder when the storm nearly drowned out the sound. "Enter," came a deep voice from within. The study was a large room, yet it felt close and intimate in the storm-darkened evening. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting dancing shadows on shelves of leather-bound books. At a massive desk sat Duke Alistair Montfort, his dark head bent over leather-bound ledgers, a single guttering candle beside him. "Your correspondence, Your Grace," Clara said, dropping into a curtsy. He looked up, and Clara caught her breath. In the firelight, his face showed a haunting, beauty-sharp cheekbones, strong jaw, and eyes that held such profound sadness it made her heart ache. "Leave them there," he said, gesturing to a corner of the desk without truly looking at her. Clara placed the letters down carefully. But instead of withdrawing, she noticed how the Duke squinted at his work in the failing light. Without thinking, she reached for the fresh candle she'd brought along in her apron pocket. "Your Grace, if I may?" She stepped forward, lighting the new candle from the dying one. "The better light will ease the strain on your eyes." The Duke stared at her, clearly startled by this simple act of consideration. His expression softened almost imperceptibly. "You are thoughtful," he said quietly. "'Tis nothing, Your Grace, just a small comfort." Thunder rolled again, but in the study, time seemed to still. The Duke set down his quill, his eyes never leaving her face. "I have not," he began, then paused as if the words were foreign to him. "I have not touched a woman in years." The confession hung in the air between them, heavy with unspoken grief. Clara stood frozen, her heart beating wildly against her ribs. She ought to leave propriety, demanded it, but something in his lost expression held her in place. In 2 fluid steps, he was before her. His hand, trembling slightly, reached up to touch her cheek. Clara knew she should step back, but the tenderness in his touch made her breath catch. Then his lips were on hers, gentle yet urgent, as if all his years of loneliness had crystallized into this one moment. The kiss was soft, almost reverent, but Clara could feel the barely contained passion beneath its years of repressed emotion seeking release. Her mind whirled with the impossibility of it all, even as her body responded to his touch. She was a blacksmith's daughter. He was a duke. This could not be,
As suddenly as it began, it ended. The Duke stepped back, his face a mask of shock at his own actions.
Forgive me, he said hoarsely. That was unforgivable. You must forget this moment entirely. That is an order. Clara's hands flew to her lips, still tingling from his kiss. Your Grace, leave me, he commanded, turning his back to her. Now, she fled the study, her skirts rustling as she rushed to the servant's stair. Her heart pounded so loudly she could barely hear the storm anymore. Only when she reached the safety of the narrow stairwell did she pause, pressing her hand against the cool stone wall to steady herself. Outside, the storm's fury had spent itself, softening to a gentle drizzle that pattered against the windows. Clara touched her lips again, hardly daring to believe what had happened. The Duke had kissed her. Her, Clara Whitcomb, a common maid. And though she knew she should feel only shame and fear, her heart harbored a secret, trembling hope that refused to be silenced. Clara stared at the ceiling of her small attic room as the first rays of dawn crept through her window. Sleep had eluded her all night, her mind racing with memories of the Duke's unexpected kiss. The rough wool blankets scratched against her chin as she turned restlessly, remembering the gentle press of his lips. The scent of leather and wood smoke that clung to him down in the servants' hall. The clatter of breakfast preparations already echoed through the corridors. Clara dressed quickly in her simple black dress and white apron, pinning her hair neatly beneath her cap. As she descended the narrow stairs, excited whispers from the kitchen reached her ears. The Dowager Duchess arrives today. Jenny, one of the kitchen maids, announced breathlessly to the gathered servants. Cook says we're to prepare her favorite cherry tarts and have fresh roses in every room. Heaven help us all, muttered Mary, the oldest housemaid, as she stirred her porridge. That woman could freeze hell itself with one look. Clara's stomach tightened as she took her place at the long wooden table. She had heard stories of the Dowager's legendary strictness, her iron grip on propriety and tradition. The modest breakfast of porridge and bread stuck in her throat. By mid-morning, the great house hummed with anticipation. Clara helped polish silver and dust curtains until every surface gleamed. Through the front windows, she watched as a magnificent carriage pulled by 4 matched grays thundered up the drive. The Montfort crest emblazoned on its doors, the Dowager swept into the entrance hall like a storm cloud, her black silk dress rustling ominously. Her sharp eyes missed nothing as footmen hurried to collect her luggage. "Where is my son?" she demanded, her voice carrying through the halls. Clara hung back in the shadows, watching as Duke Alastair emerged from his study to greet his mother. His face was a careful mask, revealing nothing of the passionate man who had kissed her just hours before. "Mother," he said, bowing formally, "welcome to Montfort Hall." "Alastair," the Dowager replied, extending her hand. "We have much to discuss. I've arranged for Lady Evelina Fairfax to join us for dinner tomorrow evening." Clara's heart stuttered as she carried fresh linens to the Dowager's chambers. Through the partially open door, she could hear the older woman's imperious tones. "It is time, Alastair. 8 years of mourning is quite enough. Lady Evelina comes from an impeccable family, and her dowry will help restore the Eastern estates. The marriage will be announced before Christmas. Mother, I have no desire to. Your desires are irrelevant. You have a duty to this family. To this title, I will not watch the Montfort line wither, because you cannot move past Catherine's death." Clara's hands trembled as she arranged the Dowager's gowns in the massive wardrobe. From her position in the dressing room, she could see Alastair's reflection in the mirror as he paced the chamber beyond. His eyes met hers for a brief electric moment before he looked away, his jaw tight. "Very well, Mother," he said at last, his voice hollow. "I will receive Lady Evelina tomorrow." The Dowager's satisfaction radiated through the room. "Excellent. Now, "Where is my new lady's maid? I wish to change before tea." Clara stepped forward, curtsying deeply. "Here, your grace." Those cold eyes assessed her like a merchant evaluating livestock. "You'll do, I suppose. Though you seem rather common for the position. Mrs. Enderby's standards must be slipping." Throughout the long afternoon, Clara attended the dowager with trembling hands, each moment aware of the growing danger of her position. That single kiss now felt like a burning coal in her chest, threatening to ignite a scandal that would destroy them both. Every time Alistair passed in the corridors, his gaze lingered on her face before he forced himself to look away. As evening fell, Clara worked by candlelight in the dowager's chambers, carefully hanging the lady's extensive wardrobe. Tears slid silently down her cheeks as she smoothed the rich fabrics. Each rustle of silk a reminder of the impossible distance between her world and the Duke's. She pressed her face into a velvet gown to muffle a sob, knowing she must lock away her heart before it brought ruin to them all. Clara adjusted her woolen shawl against the autumn chill as she followed the Duke along the muddy path beside the river. The recent rains had swollen the waters, making them rush past with unusual force. Behind them, Thomas the groom kept a respectful distance, leading their horses and providing the necessary appearance of propriety. The morning had started, with an unexpected summons. The Duke needed to deliver instructions to tenant farmers about winter preparations, and Clara had been chosen to carry his correspondence and ledger. Now, the weak sunlight filtered through bare branches as they walked, their boots leaving deep impressions in the damp earth. "Miss Wickham," the Duke broke their companionable silence, his voice softer than she had ever heard it in the great house. "I find myself wanting to speak of things I have held silent these many years." Clara's heart quickened, but she kept her eyes modestly lowered. "Your Grace is kind to confide in me." 8 years, he said, pausing to watch the rushing water. 8 years since Elizabeth passed, yet some days the grief feels as fresh as morning dew. His shoulders, usually so straight and proud, seem to carry an invisible weight. Time does not always heal as quickly as others expect. "Your Grace," Clara offered gently, thinking of her own mother's passing years ago. The Duke turned to her, his eyes showing a vulnerability that made her breath catch. "You speak as one who understands loss. My mother died when I was young," Clara shared, her voice warm with memory. "But my father, he taught me that honest work helps ease the heart's burdens. In his forge, each strike of the hammer was like a prayer." "A blacksmith's daughter," Alistair mused, a slight smile softening his features. "Tell me of your father's trade." As they walked, Clara spoke of the satisfaction of seeing raw metal transformed into useful tools, of the warmth of the forge on winter mornings, and of her father's patience in teaching apprentices. The Duke listened intently, asking questions that showed genuine interest in common lives so different from his own. Their conversation flowed naturally to deeper waters of faith that sustained through hard times of duty to family and legacy, of the peculiar loneliness that could exist even in a house full of people. Clara found herself speaking more freely than propriety usually allowed, drawn by the Duke's earnest attention. "Your father seems a man of principle," Alistair observed as they paused to rest on a fallen log. Thomas remained at a discreet distance, attending to the horses. "It shows in his daughter." Clara felt her cheeks warm at the compliment. "He believes in the dignity of honest work, Your Grace, that all labor has worth, whether done in a forge or a grand house." "Would that more shared such wisdom?" he replied softly, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her heart flutter in that moment. Clara knew with startling clarity that her feelings for the Duke had grown beyond mere attraction. Something deeper had taken root in her heart, something she must never speak aloud. She was a servant, and he was bound by duty to his station and his mother's plans for his remarriage. The afternoon passed swiftly as they visited various tenant farms. Clara watched as Alistair spoke with each family, showing a considerate attention to their concerns that belied his reputation for coldness. His grief, she realized, had been mistaken for arrogance by those who didn't look closer. As dusk approached, they made their way back to Montfort Hall. The setting sun painted the stone walls in shades of gold and purple, while windows began to twinkle with lamplight. At the servants' entrance, Clara paused, one hand rising unconsciously to her lips, where the memory of their kiss still lingered from days before. "Thank you for your assistance today, Miss Whitcomb," the Duke said formally, though his eyes held warmth that made her pulse quicken. "It was my honor, Your Grace," she replied softly, dropping into a proper curtsy before retreating into the familiar shadows of the servants' corridor. Standing just inside the door, Clara pressed her fingers to her lips, feeling the ghost of that forbidden kiss. The day's intimate conversations had only deepened her growing feelings, making them more dangerous than ever. With effort, she straightened her spine and smoothed her apron, preparing to return to her proper place in the household's rigid hierarchy. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows through the library windows as Clara methodically dusted the oak shelves. Duke Montfort had departed an hour earlier to visit the tenant farms, leaving her to tend to the rarely used room. The musty scent of aged leather, bindings and forgotten papers filled the air as she worked. Her cloth passed over rows of leather-bound volumes, stirring small clouds that danced in the golden light. The task was peaceful, allowing her mind to drift back to their morning walk by the river. The Duke's unexpected openness had touched something deep within her heart, though she knew such thoughts were dangerous. Behind a particularly dusty row of ledgers, her hand brushed against something different. Not the smooth leather she expected, but the rough texture of tied ribbon. Curious, she carefully moved the heavy books aside. There, hidden from view, lay a packet of letters bound with a faded blue ribbon that had once been elegant. Clara's breath caught as she recognized the seal, the same that graced the portraits of the late Duchess Elizabeth throughout the house. Her hands trembled as she lifted the packet, knowing she should leave it untouched. Yet something about these forgotten messages called to her, as if the late Duchess herself wished them found. "I should not," she whispered to the empty room. But her fingers were already untying the delicate knot, careful not to damage the aged ribbon. The topmost letter's paper was yellowed but still crisp, the elegant handwriting clear despite the passage of years. "My dearest sister," Clara read softly, her heart pounding. "I write to you as autumn paints our gardens in gold, knowing my time grows short. The physician speaks gentle words, but I see truth in his eyes." Clara sank into a nearby chair, drawn into the intimate thoughts of a woman she had never met. The letter spoke of love for Alistair, of joy in their brief years together. And then Clara's hands shook heart of hopes for his future. "I pray he will love again." The words flowed across the page, not from duty or mother's demands, but from the heart that captured mine so completely. Alistair deserves such happiness, though he will resist it in his grief. Promise me, dear sister, you will remind him when the time comes love must guide him, not obligation. Tears blurred Clara's vision as she carefully refolded the letter. The late Duchess's words seemed to reach across time itself, granting permission for feelings Clara had tried so hard to deny. Yet the very act of reading such private correspondence could mean immediate dismissal if discovered. She gathered the packet with trembling hands, knowing she had to hide it quickly. The sound of horses in the courtyard sent her heart racing. The Duke returning early. Hastily, she retied the ribbon and slipped the letters into her apron pocket, then rushed to replace the ledgers exactly as she had found them. The library door remained closed as hoofbeats faded toward the stables. Clara pressed a hand to her racing heart, acutely aware of the weight of the letters against her side. What was she to do with this knowledge? To reveal the letters might ease the Duke's burden of duty, might even give him permission to follow his heart, but it would also expose her trespass in reading them as darkness fell over Montfort Hall. Clara climbed the narrow servants' stairs to her attic room. The packet seemed to burn against her skin, a secret too powerful to keep, yet too dangerous to share. By candlelight, she changed into her nightdress, her movements automatic as her mind churned with indecision. Finally, she lifted her thin pillow and gently placed the letters beneath it. The late Duchess's words echoed in her thoughts. Love must guide him, not obligation. Kneeling beside her bed, Clara clasped her hands and bowed her head. Dear Lord, she whispered into the darkness, grant me wisdom to know what is right. These letters could change everything or destroy what little I have. Show me the path I must take. The candle flame flickered, casting dancing shadows on the wall as Clara remained in prayer, seeking guidance for the choice that lay before her. Above her head, the packet of letters waited silently, holding truths that could reshape both their lives for better or worse. The autumn morning erupted with the bright call of trumpets, startling birds from the courtyard trees. A magnificent, gilded carriage, drawn by 4 pristine white horses, rolled through Montfort Hall's gates with an entourage of liveried footmen trotting alongside. The household staff lined up at attention as Lady Evelina Fairfax made her entrance, her silk skirts rustling like wind through leaves. Clara stood among the servants, watching as Lady Evelina descended from her carriage with practiced grace. Her golden hair gleamed in the morning light, arranged in elaborate curls that framed a face both beautiful and calculating. The Dowager Duchess hurried forward, arms outstretched in welcome. My dearest Lady Evelina, how wonderful to see you. Looking so enchanting, the Dowager exclaimed, taking the younger woman's hands in hers. Dear Duchess Montfort, you are too kind, Evelina replied with a silvery laugh. The journey was worth every moment to be here at last. Clara noticed how Evelina's sweet demeanor shifted the instant the Dowager turned away. Her eyes grew cold. As they swept over the assembled servants, lingering particularly on Clara with barely concealed disdain. You there? Evelina snapped, pointing at Clara. My trunks require immediate attention. Do try not to soil the silk with your common hands. The other servants shifted uncomfortably as Clara stepped forward. Yes, my lady, she replied quietly, maintaining her dignity despite the deliberate slight. Throughout the morning, Evelina orchestrated a series of chance encounters with Duke Montfort. She appeared in the library just as he was selecting a book, her voice honeyed with false interest in his choice of reading. Later, she wandered into the conservatory while he reviewed estate papers, claiming to be lost while seeking the drawing room. Each time, Alistair responded with impeccable but distant courtesy. Indeed, Lady Evelina, Shakespeare's sonnets are quite moving, he would say, or allow me to have a footman escort you to your destination. His eyes remained cool, showing none of the warmth Clara had glimpsed during their river walks. While serving tea in the drawing room, Clara felt Evelina's gaze following her every movement. The lady's voice carried clearly as she addressed the Dowager. One must maintain proper standards with servants these days. Some of them forget their place entirely, imagining themselves worthy of attention above their station. The crystal sugar tongs trembled slightly in Clara's hands, but she continued her duties without reaction. She noticed, however, how Alistair's jaw tightened at Evelina's words, though he said nothing as the afternoon wore on. Evelina's frustration at Alistair's indifference became increasingly apparent. She watched him like a hawk, noting how his eyes would unconsciously seek out Clara whenever she entered a room. The lady's beautiful features hardened each time, though her smile remained fixed in place. Evening brought Clara to the servants' hall, carrying linens for washing. She paused at the sound of voices around the corner, Evelina and her personal maid speaking in hushed tones. "The little blacksmith's girl needs to be dealt with," Evelina whispered venomously. "I've seen how he looks at her. We'll need to arrange a suitable scandal, perhaps some missing jewelry found in her possession. Or better yet, evidence of her sneaking to his chambers at night." "Very good, my lady," her maid replied. "I can easily plant the items tonight." Clara stood frozen, the linens clutched to her chest as Evelina continued plotting. Once she's disgraced, the Duke will have no choice but to dismiss her. And with that distraction removed, he'll finally see sense about our match. After all, his dear mother has quite set her heart upon it. The voices moved away, leaving Clara trembling in the shadowed hallway. The casual cruelty of their plotting struck her like a physical blow, yet she knew that speaking out would only hasten her downfall. She had no proof, and her word would never stand against a lady's. Silently, she continued toward the laundry, her mind racing. The packet of letters hidden beneath her pillow seemed to weigh on her conscience more heavily than ever. Should she reveal them now, before Evelina could enact her schemes, or would that only make things worse? The answer eluded her as she worked, while somewhere above, Evelina's soft laughter echoed through the halls like a warning. Frost patterns decorated the study windows as Clara made her way through the darkened corridors of Montfort Hall, carefully balancing a silver tray with mulled wine. The spiced aroma of cinnamon and cloves wafted up, warming her cold fingers as she approached the Duke's study. Candlelight flickered beneath the door, a welcoming beacon in the winter evening. She knocked softly. "Enter," came the Duke's voice. Weighted with exhaustion, Clara found him standing by the hearth, one arm braced against the mantel, staring into the flames. The firelight cast dancing shadows across his face, highlighting the strain around his eyes. She set the tray down quietly. On his desk, "Thank you, Clara," he said, turning to face her. "Please, stay a moment." Her heart quickened at his informal use of her name. She remained by the desk, hands clasped before her, as proper distance demanded. "I cannot bear this charade any longer," Alistair said suddenly, his voice rough with emotion. These past weeks of pretending interest in Evelina's shallow chatter, of ignoring what my heart truly desires, he crossed the room in swift strides, stopping just before her. "Clara, I love you, not Evelina. Not the prospect of an advantageous match." You, Clara's breath caught in her throat. "Your Grace, I, Alistair," he corrected gently. "Please, with you, I wish to be simply Alistair." "We cannot," she whispered, though her heart cried out otherwise. "The Dowager, your position, my station, I care nothing for station," he said fiercely. "You have brought light back into these dark halls, warmth to a heart I thought forever frozen." His hand rose to cup her cheek, thumb brushing. Away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. "Tell me you feel nothing, and I shall never speak of this again." Instead of answering, Clara lifted her face to his. Their lips met in a kiss that held all the tenderness of spring after winter, deliberate and sweet. This was no accident of passion like their first kiss, but a choice made with full hearts. Neither noticed the study door had been left slightly ajar, nor saw young Henry the footman watching with wide eyes from the shadows. The coins in his pocket, Evelina's bribe for information, felt suddenly heavy as lead. The next morning dawned bitter cold, but the chill in the servants' hall cut deeper than any winter wind. Clara was summoned to the Dowager's morning room, where Evelina stood triumphant beside the Duchess's chair. "You leave us no choice but to dismiss you immediately," the Dowager declared, her voice sharp as icicles. "Such behavior cannot be tolerated. In a respectable household, my lady," Clara began, but Evelina cut her off with a cruel smile. "Spare us your common excuses. Did you truly believe you could rise above your station? A blacksmith's daughter, seducing a duke?" Whispers followed Clara as she packed her few belongings, the servants who had once been friendly now turning away. In shocked disapproval, only Mrs. Enderby, the housekeeper, showed any kindness, pressing a warm cloak into her hands. "The roads are treacherous with snow. Child," she murmured, "take care." In the grand hall, Clara caught one last glimpse of Alistair, trapped between his mother and Evelina. The dowager's words carried clearly: "You will marry Lady Evelina immediately, or watch our family's reputation crumble to dust. Think of your position, your responsibilities." Alistair's face was a mask of anguish as his eyes met Clara's across the marble expanse. She turned away before her tears could fall, pushing open the heavy doors to face the winter morning. Snow had begun to fall as Clara trudged down the long drive, each step taking her further from love and warmth. The borrowed cloak wrapped around her shoulders couldn't ward off the chill that had settled in her heart. Behind her, Montfort Hall's windows stared down like accusing eyes, while ahead lay the long road back to her father's forge, and a future suddenly emptied of all its promise. Chapter 8. Return to the forge. The winter sun had barely risen when Clara's hired carriage finally rattled to a stop before her father's forge. 2 days of jolting travel along frozen roads had left her bones aching and her spirit heavy. The familiar sight of smoke curling from the chimney brought fresh tears to her eyes. Tears, she thought, had run dry miles ago. Her father emerged from the workshop, his leather apron dusted with soot, his weathered face creasing with concern. Without a word about her sudden arrival or tear-stained cheeks, Thomas Whitcomb enfolded his daughter in strong arms that smelled of iron and wood smoke. "Welcome home, my girl," he murmured into her hair, as though she had merely been gone for an afternoon rather than months of service at Montfort Hall. Clara buried her face in his shoulder, letting out a shuddering breath. "Father, I hush now," he said gently. "There's bread warming by the hearth and work to be done. Rest can come later." The simple routine of village life embraced Clara like a well-worn blanket. That first morning, she rekindled the kitchen hearth, her hands remembering the familiar motions of laying kindling and coaxing flames to life. The physical task helped steady her trembling fingers, though each spark reminded her of candlelit moments in the Duke's study. She threw herself into domestic duties with desperate energy. The repetitive motion of needle and thread as she mended her father's shirts offered small comfort. Each stitch was a reminder that honest work could still fill her days even if her dreams lay shattered. The water barrels running low, her father mentioned over a simple supper of bread and stew. Clara welcomed the excuse to escape the cottage's close walls. The winter air bit at her cheeks as she made trips to and from the village well, her wooden bucket swaying. The physical strain of carrying water felt right a clean sort of ache, so different from the hollow pain in her chest. "Good day to you, Miss Clara," called Mrs. Bennet, the baker's wife, as Clara passed. The woman's smile held no judgment, no whispered scandal. Here, she was simply Thomas Whitcomb's daughter, known since childhood. A week passed in this manner, each day measured out in practical tasks. Clara scrubbed floors until her knuckles were raw, beat rugs until dust clouds rose around her, and helped her father organize his tools anything to keep her hands busy and her mind from wandering to Montfort Hall. But peace proved fragile. On market day, the post-rider's horn echoed through the village square. Clara was selecting vegetables when she heard the whisper start. "Have you heard? The Duke of Montfort is hosting a grand Christmas ball." Her fingers tightened around a winter carrot as the gossip continued. "They say he's to announce his betrothal to Lady Evelina Fairfax." Such a fine match, the vegetables tumbled from Clara's numb fingers. She barely registered the seller's concerned questions as she hurried away. Her marketing basket forgotten, her feet carried her to the village church, its stone walls offering sanctuary as they had since her childhood. Inside, The air hung heavy with the scent of beeswax candles and ancient wood. Clara sank onto a worn wooden pew, drawing her father's cloak tight around her shoulders. With trembling hands, she withdrew a packet of letters from her satchel. Late Duchess's final thoughts, still bound with faded ribbon. She had not dared to leave them behind at Montfort Hall, though their weight seemed to grow heavier with each passing day. Clara approached the bank of prayer candles, fishing a copper from her pocket to leave in the offering box. The taper trembled in her grip as she lit it from another flame. Tears fell freely now, spotting the sealed letters she still clutched. "Grant me strength," she whispered, watching her candle's flame join the others. The Duchess's last wishes for her husband's happiness seemed to mock Clara now. What good was knowing the truth when society's barriers stood immovable as stone? The church bells tolled the hour, their deep resonance echoing through the empty nave. Clara remained kneeling, her tears falling silently as she prayed not for her own happiness anymore, but simply for the strength to endure. Chapter 8. Return to the Forge, Scene 2. The small stone church stood silent in the crisp morning air as villagers filed in for Sunday service. Clara adjusted her plain wool dress, the same she had worn countless times before her employment at Montfort Holland, slipped into the back pew where servants traditionally sat. The familiar scent of beeswax candles and worn hymnals brought comfort, though her heart still ached with every beat. Sunlight filtered through the age-stained glass, casting rainbow shadows across weathered faces as the congregation settled. Among them sat tenant farmers from the Montfort estates, their Sunday best showing signs of careful mending. They had traveled far for the service, as was their custom, bringing news and whispers of the grand Christmas ball soon to be held at the hall. Clara's fingers trembled against the sealed packet of letters hidden in her pocket. Throughout the service, while the vicar spoke of faith and courage, she felt their weight like lead against her side. The late Duchess's words had haunted her dreams for days now. She knew she could keep silent no longer. As the final hymn faded and people began to rise, Clara stood. Her legs shook, but her voice rang clear across the hushed church. "I pray you, good people, might I speak?" The vicar paused, surprised, but nodded kindly. He had known Clara since childhood, and had always found her to be a soul of quiet virtue. With trembling hands, Clara withdrew the packet of letters, the faded ribbon falling softly as she opened them. These words were written by Her Grace, the late Duchess of Montfort, before God called her home. A murmur rippled through the congregation, but Clara pressed on, her voice growing stronger. "My dearest Alastair," she read, her voice catching on his name. "As I write these words, knowing my time grows short, my heart carries one final prayer. When grief's shadow passes, and pass it must, my love, I beseech you to open your heart again." The church grew still as death. Even the children ceased their fidgeting as Clara continued. "Not for duty's sake, nor for the demands of society, but for love alone. True love, which sees past titles and birth into the very soul. This is my dying wish, that you find joy again with one whose heart beats in time with yours. Be she Duchess or Dairy Maid." Tears gleamed on weather-worn cheeks throughout the congregation. The tenant farmers exchanged meaningful glances, their loyalty to the Montfort family spanning generations. They had watched their duke retreat into darkness after his wife's death, and these words struck deep chords in their hearts. For what is nobility? Clara's voice grew stronger, if not the courage to love purely and truly. What worth has a title if it chains the heart? Let love guide you, my darling, as it guided us. This is my final gift to you, permission to love again, freely and fully, and fully. The silence that followed seemed to stretch for eternity. Then, one by one, the tenant farmers stood, bowing respectfully to Clara. They understood the weight of what they had heard and, more importantly, They understood what must be done with such knowledge. "We'll see these words reach His Grace," promised old Thomas Wilbury, who had worked Montfort lands for 50 years. Truth must be heard. Miss and her Grace's last wishes honored. The news spread like wildfire through the countryside. That very afternoon, servants traveling back to their posts carried the story. Farmers returning to their tenancies spoke of it in hushed, reverent tones. The words of the late Duchess flew from lip to lip, gaining speed like a winter storm racing across the moors. That evening, as darkness settled over Montfort Hall, a trusted messenger arrived bearing the packet of letters. The Duke sat alone in his study, the same room where he had first kissed Clara. As he opened the worn pages with shaking hands, candlelight flickered across the familiar handwriting of his beloved first wife. As he read her final gift, her blessing. For him to love again, tears fell freely down his cheeks. In the quiet of his study, surrounded by the ghosts of duty and tradition, Alistair whispered a single word into the darkness. "Clara." The letters trembled in his hands, his late wife's words of love and wisdom burning bright against the gathering night. The great hall of Montfort Hall blazed with hundreds of beeswax candles, their light dancing off crystal goblets and ladies' jewels. Christmas garlands draped every alcove, filling the air with a scent of pine and winter roses. The assembled nobility stood in clusters, whispering behind gloved hands as Duke Alistair Montfort stood beside Lady Evelina Fairfax, his face an unreadable mask. The Dowager Duchess swept forward, her silver-gray silk rustling against the polished floor. Just as she raised her hand to command silence, Alistair stepped forward, the late Duchess's letters visible in his grip. "My lords and ladies," his voice rang clear through the hushed hall. "Before any announcement is made, there are words you must hear." He unfolded the precious pages, their edges worn from recent readings. As he read his late wife's final wishes aloud, Lady Evelina's face grew storm-dark. "And so," Alistair concluded, turning to face the assembly, "I will not marry where love is absent. Lady Evelina has shown herself unworthy through her cruelty to those she deemed beneath her. My heart belongs to one whose nobility shines not through birth, but through the purity of her soul." Evelina's shriek of outrage echoed off the vaulted ceiling as she fled the hall, her reputation in tatters. The Dowager Duchess stood frozen, her face pale as she recognized her late daughter-in-law's handwriting. Slowly, her rigid posture softened. "My son," she whispered, touching the letters with trembling fingers. She wished for your happiness above all. I give my blessing." Without another word, Alistair strode from the hall. His horse's hooves thundered through the snowy night until he reached the village forge. There, through the window, he saw Clara tending the fire, her face glowing in its light. He knelt before her in the warmth of the hearth. "Be my wife," he said simply. His heart in his eyes. The banns were read over 3 joyful Sundays, and the wedding drew both nobility and villagers to celebrate love's triumph over prejudice. And now, in Montfort Hall's great hall, Clara stood, resplendent beside her husband. Their joined hands a bridge between 2 worlds, as servants and nobles alike raised their voices in a jubilant cheer. Alistair drew her close. "Never again shall I be untouched," he whispered, and sealed his promise with a kiss that spoke of winters warmed by love's eternal flame. Thank you for watching. If this one reached you, consider subscribing. I'll be back tomorrow with more meaning, more humanity.